Time. Any personal concept of time, for the astronaut, will almost certainly come to an end with him. Stephen Hawking. Hawking wrote about the nature of time. Our view of the nature of time has changed over the years. Until the beginning of this century, people believed in absolute time, that is, that each event could be labeled by a unique and differentiated number called time. But with the discovery that the speed of light is the same for every observer, we had to abandon the idea that there was a single and absolute time. Instead, each observer would have his own measure of time. Thus, time became a more personal concept, relative to the observer who measured it. It turned out that there is no single time pattern. Instead, each observer has his or her own time. Time remains an unexplained, just described concept for most, and for this reason it produces the most confusing interpretations. Time is nothing more than a standard measure of displacement in space. One day, it is a standard measure, demarcated by the rotation of planet Earth about its own imaginary axis, and the times of all other displacements that occur relative to the Earth's surface are parts given in relation to that standard displacement. Time is not something tangible, and it does not have its own nature different from that used by us as a measure of displacement. That is, it does not have an existence independent or separate from the notion of displacement, which is relative. No displacement exists absolutely. The distinction between time, the standard measure of displacement in space, and space itself disappears completely. The idea of displacement has only local validity, in one or two references at most, and is indistinguishable from space, since the concept of time does not exist apart from the idea of displacement in space, which is only locally valid. Also, according to Hawking, only if we could visualize the universe in terms of imaginary time would there be no singularities. When we return to the real time in which we live, however, we will still have the impression that there are singularities. This may suggest that the so-called imaginary time is actually real time, and that what we call real time is just the result of our imagination. Maybe what we call imaginary time is actually more basic, and what we call real is just an idea we invent to help us describe what we think the universe is like. A scientific theory is simply a mathematical model that we create to describe our observations. It exists only in our minds. Thus, it makes no sense to ask what is real, or imaginary time. It's simply a matter of knowing which one is the most useful description. What Hawking calls real time is the concept of time that dates back to before Newton, and which until now has remained untouched thanks to the gymnastics developed by Einstein in order to keep it that way. Time is a standard way of measuring displacements in space, which is totally dependent on the notion of displacement, and which doesn't happen for the universe, doesn't happen for the whole. Time is, therefore, just a valuable device, of enormous local utility, and it has no validity for the universe, it has no validity for the whole.